For 12 years, I turned her little neighborhood bakery into a chain people lined up around the block for. And then one Tuesday afternoon, she sat me down and told me Victor, her brand new husband, would be taking over my role. I looked at her for a long moment, reached into my apron pocket, and placed the master key to the recipe vault on the desk between us. You have 48 hours, I said, my voice quieter than I expected, before every original formula locks itself permanently. Tell Victor the first said hello. That key made the softest little clink when it touched the wood. A sound so small, but it was the sound of an entire world ending. My name is Elena Ramirez, and this is the story of how I walked away from the only family I thought I had, and how walking away turned out to be the kindest thing I ever did, for them. And for me. But to understand why that key meant everything, why 48 hours was all it would take to bring 28 locations to their knees, you have to go back. Back to when I was 28, broke, and standing in the doorway of a tiny bakery that smelled like brown butter and second chances. If you've ever poured your heart into something, really poured it, until there was nothing left for yourself, stay with me. This one's for you. It was 12 years ago, almost to the day, when I first walked into Maggie's little bakery on Elm Street. I was 28, carrying everything I owned in 2 duffel bags, and I hadn't slept properly in weeks. My mother had left when I was 12. My father never really showed up after that, and I'd been raising my younger brother on minimum wage jobs and sheer stubbornness. I remember the bell above the door jingling, the warm rush of air that smelled like vanilla, browned butter, and something that felt dangerously close to home. Maggie was behind the counter, flour on her apron, gray hair escaping her bun, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting me. "You're late," she said. "I am?" I asked, confused. I'd answered an ad for a part-time counter girl. "You are," she repeated, "but you're here now, that's what matters. Come on back, let's see what you can do." That first day, she handed me a bowl and told me to cream butter and sugar by hand. No mixer. She wanted to see if I had feel. My arms ached after 10 minutes, but I kept going until the mixture was pale and fluffy, just like she wanted. She tasted it with the tip of her finger, nodded once, and said, "Good, you stay." That was Maggie. No interviews, no references, just instinct and trust. The bakery back then was one small shop, 8 tables, a display case that never stayed full, and a kitchen the size of a walk-in closet. Maggie had opened it 30 years earlier after her husband died young and her only son, Thomas, was killed in a car accident at 19. She'd poured every ounce of grief into butter, sugar, and yeast. People came from 3 towns over for her lemon lavender scones and her chocolate cardamom babka. But it was still just one location, barely breaking even. I didn't know anything about running a bakery, but I knew how to work. I showed up early, stayed late, asked questions, took notes, tasted everything twice. Within a year, Maggie let me start experimenting. I developed a salted honey custard that people still talk about. Then a miso caramel that made grown men close their eyes when they took the first bite. I figured out how to scale her recipes without losing the soul of them. I built spreadsheets for inventory, negotiated with suppliers, created seasonal menus that kept customers coming back every month. Maggie watched it all with this quiet pride. One night, after we'd closed and were cleaning up together, she looked at me across the stainless steel table and said, "You know, Elena, Thomas would have loved you. You've got his hands for this work. Steady, patient." I felt something crack open in my chest when she said that. No one had ever claimed me like that before. From that day on, Maggie became more than my boss. She became the mother I'd lost, the family I'd never really had. She taught me how to temper chocolate, how to read a proofing dough by touch, how to price things so we made money but never priced people out. And I gave her everything. Every idea, every extra hour, every piece of myself. We grew, slowly at first, one new location in the next town, then another. By year 5, we had 8 shops. By year 10, 18. By the time I was 40, Maggie's Sweet Haven was 28 locations across 3 states, featured in magazines, winning awards, the kind of place people planned vacations around. Revenue had grown more than 600%. And every single signature item, Every process that made us different, every supplier relationship that kept our ingredients pristine, those were mine. I was the one who built the master recipe vault, a climate-controlled room in the flagship store where the original handwritten formulas lived, along with the digital backups I updated daily. I was the one who created the exact ratios, the fermentation schedules, the sourcing standards no one else could replicate. I did it because Maggie hated computers and trusted me completely. She'd laugh and say, "You're the brains, kid, I'm just the taste buds." People thought it was magic. They didn't realize it was 12 years of trial and error, of tasting 1,000 failed batches, of waking up at 3 a.m. to check proofs, of missing birthdays and holidays and relationships because something was always in the oven. I didn't mind. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. Because Maggie was my family. And family, I thought, was worth any price. And that's the thing about family, you don't always get to choose them. But when someone chooses you, it feels like the rarest kind of miracle. Maggie chose me. Over those 12 years, she became the mother I'd never truly had. On slow Tuesday mornings, we'd sit in the back booth with coffee and yesterday's croissants. And she'd tell me stories about Thomas, how he used to sneak extra chocolate into the babka dough when he was little. How he could taste a batter and tell you exactly what it needed before it even went in the oven. She kept his photo behind the register, a smiling boy with flour on his nose. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me while I worked, and there was this softness in her eyes, like she was seeing him in the way I coaxed a difficult dough into something beautiful. She started introducing me as my daughter Elena to suppliers, to customers, even to her old friends at church. When my little brother needed braces and I was short on cash, Maggie paid for them without a second thought. When I turned 35 and hadn't had a real vacation in years, she closed the flagship store for 3 days, just for me, and sent me to a little cabin upstate with a box of books and a note that said, "Rest, kid, the ovens will still be here when you get back." I never took the full 3 days. I was back after one, worried about the new seasonal menu. I gave up everything else without even noticing it was happening. There was a guy, Daniel, who owned the flower shop 2 doors down. We dated for almost a year. He was kind, patient, the kind of man who brought me coffee when I was testing recipes at midnight. But every time he asked me to spend a full weekend away, something came up, a new supplier contract, a dough that wasn't behaving, a location that needed my hands on deck. One night he sat me down and said, "Elena, I love you, but I'm tired of competing with a bakery." I told him he wasn't competing. He was just losing. He left the next week. I cried once, in the walk-in cooler so no one would see, then went back to laminating dough for croissants. My apartment stayed half unpacked for years, just a bed, a tiny kitchen I rarely used, and stacks of notebooks filled with flavor ideas. My friends from community college drifted away because I was always too busy. I told myself it was worth it. Because every time a new location opened, Maggie would squeeze my hand and say, "Look what we built, kid, look what we did." I was 40 years old, and Maggie's sweet haven was my entire identity. I didn't have a partner, kids, hobbies that didn't involve sugar or butter. I had 28 kitchens that ran like clockwork because I'd made them that way. I had suppliers who called me first with the best vanilla beans from Madagascar. I had customers who waited in line for hours just for a taste of something I'd created at 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. And I had Maggie. She was 70 now, slower than she used to be, her hands a little more arthritic, but still sharp as ever. She'd talk about retiring someday, handing it all over to me. "You're the one who grew this," she'd say. "It's yours when I'm gone." I believed her. I believed her with every part of me. Because when you've never really had a family, you hold on tight to the one that finally claims you, even when it starts asking for more than you ever thought you could give. But nothing stays the same forever, does it? Not even the families we build out of sugar and trust. It started small. Maggie turned 68 that year, and I noticed she was tiring more easily. She'd sit in the office a little longer after closing, rubbing her hands like they ached more than usual. She stopped coming in at 4 in the morning the way she used to. I told her to slow down, take more time off. She'd wave me away and say, "I'm fine, kid, just getting old." Then one Tuesday evening, She asked me to stay after we locked up the flagship store. She had this glow about her, like a schoolgirl, and she told me she'd joined a senior dance class at the community center. I met someone, she said, her cheeks pink. His name is Victor Lang. He makes me laugh. I was happy for her. Truly. After losing her husband and Thomas, Maggie had been alone for decades. She deserved someone who put that light back in her eyes. Victor showed up a few weeks later. Tall, silver-haired, expensive watch, the kind of smooth charm that feels practiced. He shook my hand too firmly, looked around the kitchen like he was appraising real estate, and said, "So this is the little empire I've been hearing about." Little empire. 28 locations, 200 employees, lines out the door on weekends. But I smiled and offered him a slice of the new brown butter pear tart I'd been perfecting. They started dating seriously. Victor took Maggie on cruises, bought her dresses she'd never wear in a kitchen, convinced her to get highlights in her hair. She was happy, giddy, even, and I was glad to see it. Then they got married. Quiet ceremony at the courthouse. Just a handful of us there. Victor moved into Maggie's big house on the hill, and suddenly he was at the bakery more often. At first it was harmless. He'd bring Maggie coffee, charm the front of house staff, take selfies with customers for social media growth. But then the suggestions started. He'd pull Maggie aside and whisper things I couldn't hear. He'd corner me in the office and say things like, "You know, Elena, you work too hard. We could streamline this, cut labor costs, switch to pre-made mixes for the basics, free up your time." Pre-made mixes. For recipes that had taken me years to perfect. I pushed back gently. "Maggie, those mixes don't taste the same. Our customers come for the real thing, the browned butter we make in-house. The vanilla we scrape ourselves. It's why we're different." Maggie would nod, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. Victor was good at planting seeds. He'd talk about modernizing, about scaling nationally, about how I was too emotionally attached to the old ways. He started coming to management meetings uninvited. He'd spread out spreadsheets he'd printed from some online template and talk about restructuring. He wanted to replace our longtime head baker, Luis, who'd been with us 15 years, with a cheaper consulting firm. He wanted to cut the overnight proofing team because nobody needs bread that fresh anymore. I fought every change. Quietly, professionally, with data, sales numbers, customer feedback, cost analyses showing why quality was our edge. But Victor had Maggie's ear in a way I never did anymore. She started repeating his phrases. "We have to evolve. Elena, Victor knows business. You're resistant to change." I felt the ground shifting under me. Slow and steady, like dough overproofing and collapsing. What hurt most wasn't the business talk. It was the way Maggie looked at me sometimes, like I was becoming a problem to solve instead of the daughter she'd once claimed. And that's when I started preparing. Not out of spite. Out of fear. Because 5 years earlier, when Maggie had a scare with her heart, I'd built something no one knew about. A safeguard. A way to protect everything we'd created if something ever happened to me, or to her. I never thought I'd need it to protect myself from the woman who'd once been my home. And the preparations I made weren't dramatic. They were quiet, careful, the way you protect something fragile when you sense the storm coming. 5 years earlier, after Maggie's heart scare, I'd built the vault, not just the physical room with the temperature-controlled cabinets and the handwritten originals, but a digital layer no one else knew about. I'd hired a small firm to create a custom encryption system tied to my personal credentials. Every night, when I updated the master recipes with that day's tweaks, maybe a touch more salt in the caramel, a longer rest for the sourdough, the system required my manual authentication to keep the files active. If my credentials ever went dormant for more than 48 hours, the formulas would auto-encrypt with a rolling key only I held. The physical copies would still be there, but without my daily unlock. The precise ratios, the timing notes, the supplier codes, everything that made replication possible, would scramble into nonsense. I designed it as insurance. In case I got hit by a bus. In case Maggie passed suddenly and someone tried to sell the business to people who didn't understand what we'd built. I told myself it was responsible. I never imagined I'd need it because the person I trusted most was slipping away from me. Victor's changes started small, then snowballed. First it was Luis, our head baker at the flagship. 15 years with us, hands like magic with laminated dough. Victor decided his salary was above market and replaced him with a consulting group that used frozen dough shipped from a factory in New Jersey. Customers noticed immediately. The croissants didn't shatter the way they used to. Reviews dropped from 4.9 to 4.3 in a month. I showed Maggie the numbers. She sighed and said, "Victor says it's temporary. We're saving money to open 5 new locations." Then he cut the overnight team. The ones who started the long fermented loaves at midnight so they'd be ready for morning rush. "We can buy par baked," he said, "heat and serve, same thing." It wasn't the same thing. Not even close. Bread went stale faster. Customers complained on social media. One of our longest corporate clients, a chain of high-end cafes, canceled their standing order for morning pastries. That was $500,000 a year gone. I documented everything. Not in anger, at first it was just habit. Emails, sales reports, customer feedback, photos of the new croissants that looked pale and sad next to the old ones. I kept a private folder on my laptop, time-stamped, organized. Proof, I told myself, that we were making mistakes we could still fix. Victor started pushing to democratize the recipes. He wanted to sell franchises. Put the formulas in a shared drive. He said, train managers to follow them. You don't need to be involved in every little thing. Elena, it's not healthy. I tried explaining, gently, over and over, that these weren't plug-and-play recipes. They required judgment, feel, adjustments for humidity, for flour protein levels that changed with every harvest. You couldn't just hand them to someone who'd taken a weekend course. But Victor had a way of making my expertise sound like a liability. Control issues, he'd murmur to Maggie when he thought I couldn't hear. She's holding the company back. And Maggie, my Maggie, started to believe him. She'd pull me aside after meetings and say, "Elena, honey, maybe he's right. You've been doing this alone for so long. It's time to let go a little. Trust the team." The team he was dismantling piece by piece. I watched our quality slip. Watched the magic fade from what we'd spent 12 years creating. And I felt something inside me go very still. So I began the quiet countdown. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped overriding the safeguard I'd built. I let the 48-hour clock start ticking in the background. Knowing that when the day came, and I could feel it coming, I would no longer authenticate. Because some things can't be franchised. Some things can't be replaced by cheaper ingredients and bigger ambitions. Some things, some people, are the secret ingredient. And when you remove them, everything else falls flat. The day it finally came wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in your bones when you realize something you've been dreading has finally arrived. It was a Thursday in early spring. The kind of morning where the air smells like warm sugar and possibility. I'd been at the flagship since 3, testing a new rhubarb custard that needed to be perfect for the summer menu. My hands were still sticky from the dough when Maggie's assistant texted, "Meeting in the office at 10. Maggie and Victor want to talk." I knew. I'd known for weeks. I washed my hands slowly, dried them on the towel that hung by the sink, the same one Maggie and I had shared for years. I took off my apron, folded it neatly, and walked upstairs to the little office above the kitchen that still smelled faintly of vanilla and old paper. Maggie was already there, sitting behind the desk that used to be hers alone. Victor stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder like he belonged there. She looked smaller somehow, tired. "Sit down, honey," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. I stayed standing. Victor cleared his throat. "Elena, we've been evaluating the structure of the business. With the growth we're planning, the franchises, the national expansion, we need fresh energy in operations. Someone who can take us to the next level." He paused, like he was waiting for me to fill in the silence. Maggie wouldn't meet my eyes. "Victor's going to step in as chief operating officer," she said finally. "He has experience with scaling brands. It's time. Elena, you've done so much, but you can step back now. Consult, maybe, or take some time for yourself. Step back." After 12 years of being the one who never stepped back. I felt it then, that cold, clear calm that comes when the worst thing finally happens and you realize you're ready for it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the master key. The one that opened the vault. The one I'd carried every single day for a decade. It was worn smooth from years of turning in the lock. I placed it on the desk between us. It landed with the softest clink. "You have 48 hours," I said, my voice steady, "before every original formula locks itself permanently." Maggie frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Victor smiled that thin, confident smile. "Elena, we have backups, digital files. We're not children. You have access to the files," I said, looking straight at Maggie now. "You don't have my daily authentication. In 48 hours, without it, the encryption rolls, the ratios scramble, the notes become unreadable. Even the physical copies won't help you recreate what we had." I checked my watch. "It's 10:12 now. Tell Victor the first said hello." I turned to go. "Elena," Maggie started, her voice cracking. I paused at the door. But I didn't turn around. "You taught me everything I know about family, Maggie. About loyalty. About building something that lasts." I took a breath. "I just never thought I'd have to protect it from you." I walked out. Down the stairs. Past the kitchen where Luis used to roll dough and hum old songs. Past the display cases filled with pastries that wouldn't taste the same tomorrow. I didn't pack a box. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was nothing left to take that wasn't already gone. I crossed the street to the little corner cafe I'd sat in 1,000 times, watching the world go by while I sketched new flavor ideas on napkins. I ordered a latte, made with real milk, real vanilla, the way we used to do it, and took a seat by the window where I could see the front of the flagship store. And then I waited. At first, everything looked normal. Customers came and went. The morning rush flowed like always. But by late afternoon, I started getting texts. From Sarah, the manager at location 12. "Something's wrong with the sourdough starter notes. The ratios don't make sense anymore." From Marcus in procurement. "Suppliers are asking about the vanilla codes. They're saying the files are corrupted." By evening, my phone was buzzing nonstop. I silenced it, took a slow sip of my latte, and watched the lights come on across the street as the night team arrived, only to stand around looking confused because the overnight recipes no longer added up. 48 hours. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Just the strangest, deepest kind of peace. Like finally setting down something I'd been carrying alone for far too long. The peace didn't last long. By the next morning, the 48-hour window had shrunk to 36, and the cracks were spreading faster than anyone expected. My phone started lighting up before I'd even finished my first coffee. First it was the manager's texts, then frantic calls. The digital files were glitching. Ratios that had worked perfectly for years were suddenly off by fractions that ruined entire batches. Doughs weren't rising right. Caramels were seizing. The miso in the caramel sauce tasted flat, like something essential had vanished overnight. Then the suppliers called. The special vanilla from a small farm in Uganda? The code to unlock the exact blend we used was now scrambled. The organic butter from the Vermont Co-op? The pricing and spec sheet attached to our contract file had turned into random characters. By noon on the second day, social media was filling with photos from disappointed customers. Croissants that looked dense and pale. Scones that crumbled wrong. One viral post showed a side-by-side, our old lemon lavender scone next to the new one, with the caption, "What happened to Maggie's Sweet Haven? This isn't it." Victor called first. I let it ring through to voicemail. His message was tight, angry. "Elena, whatever game you're playing, stop it. We have lawyers. Fix this now." Then Maggie. Her voice was smaller, shaking. "Honey, please, come in. Let's talk." I didn't answer. I just sat in that same cafe window, watching the flagship store across the street. The line that usually wrapped around the block was gone. People walked in, looked at the cases, frowned, and left. A few asked for refunds. I saw one of the new bakers through the window, holding a tray of failed babka, staring at it like it had betrayed him. By late afternoon on the second day, the twist I never saw coming started to surface. My old assistant, Carla, who'd stayed loyal through everything, texted me privately. She'd overheard Victor on the phone in the office. Door cracked open. He wasn't panicking about the recipes. He was calm, too calm. talking to someone about accelerated timelines and asset transfer once the old woman signs the final papers. Carla dug a little, quietly, carefully. Victor wasn't who he said he was. The scaling experience he bragged about? A chain of coffee shops that had gone bankrupt after he siphoned money into offshore accounts. The cruises, the watches, the smooth talk, it was all part of a pattern. He targeted widows with successful small businesses. Married them fast, isolated them from the people who actually ran things. Then bled the company dry before disappearing. Maggie wasn't just being influenced. She was being used. That night, Carla sent me screenshots. Emails Victor thought he'd deleted. Documents moving ownership percentages in tiny increments. A new will Maggie had signed, while on pain meds after a minor fall, naming Victor primary beneficiary. He hadn't just wanted to modernize the bakery. He wanted to own it. All of it. And the failing recipes? He'd been counting on them being easy to replace. He never understood they were me. By the 48-hour mark, the empire was crumbling in real time. 3 locations closed early because they ran out of anything worth selling. Corporate clients canceled contracts, wedding orders, hotel partnerships. The news picked it up. Beloved bakery chain in crisis. What went wrong at Maggie's Sweet Haven? Victor called again, voice cracking now. Offers came fast. Double my old salary. Equity. Whatever I wanted. Just come back and unlock the files. Maggie called last. She was crying. Elena, I think I've made a terrible mistake. I finally answered that one. I didn't yell. I didn't say I told you so. I just said, Maggie, some things can't be fixed in 48 hours. Some things take years to build, and only a moment to lose. Then I told her where to look. The private folder on the shared drive Victor thought was hidden. The emails, the new will, the offshore accounts. She went quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was the one I remembered from 12 years ago, strong. Clear, the Maggie who'd trusted her gut and hired a desperate 28-year-old on the spot. Thank you, kid, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I hung up, paid for my coffee, and walked away from the window. The countdown was over. But the real fallout, the kind that changes everything, was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the empire Maggie had built, and I had grown, came apart faster than anyone could have imagined. Victor disappeared within days. Once Maggie confronted him with the evidence I'd pointed her to, he packed a bag, emptied what he could from the business accounts, and vanished. Police got involved, but men like Victor are good at disappearing. The damage was done. The 28 locations started closing one by one. Without the original recipes, without the suppliers who trusted my word, without the magic that had made us special, there was nothing left to sell. The flagship store, the one where it all began, locked its doors for good 3 months later. Maggie's health declined quickly after that. The stress, the betrayal, the grief of watching her life's work crumble, it was too much. Doctors found cancer that had been quietly growing for years. She called me one afternoon, voice thin but steady. Kid, can you come? I went. She was in the big house on the hill. The one Victor had convinced her to buy furniture for that she never needed. She looked small in the hospital bed they'd set up in the living room, overlooking the garden she used to tend on her days off. We talked for hours. Not about the business at first. About Thomas. About the early days. About the first time I burned an entire batch of Madeleines and cried in the walk-in because I thought she'd fire me. She laughed until she coughed, then reached for my hand. I was wrong, she said, about everything, about him, about pushing you away. You weren't just my employee. Elena, you were the daughter I got to choose. And I threw that away for a man who never loved anything but what he could take. I didn't say it was okay. It wasn't. But I held her hand and told her about the safeguard, how I built it to protect her legacy, not destroy it. How walking away had hurt me more than I could ever admit. She cried then. Quiet tears that ran down the lines in her face like rivers finding old paths. She lived another 4 months. I was there every day. We baked together one last time, small batches in her kitchen. Just the two of us. No pressure, no timers. Simple things. Sugar cookies with the edges just right. Shortbread that melted on your tongue. She passed on a quiet Tuesday morning. The way she'd always wanted, peaceful. At home, with the smell of vanilla still in the air. The funeral was small. Old suppliers came, employees who'd been with us from the beginning. My brother flew in. I spoke about the woman who'd seen something in a tired 28-year-old and decided to trust it. Afterward, I didn't try to save what was left of Maggie's sweet haven. Some things aren't meant to be rebuilt the same way. Instead, I started something new. A tiny bakery in a neighborhood that needed one. Just 8 tables, a display case, and a kitchen where I could teach. I called it Alina's Haven, no apostrophe, no empire. Just a place where everything is made by hand. Every day, with ingredients that cost more because they're worth it. I hired people who needed second chances. Single moms who could bake after dropping kids at school. Kids fresh out of culinary programs who wanted to learn the old ways before the new ones. I reconnected with my real mother, the one who'd left when I was 12. It wasn't perfect, there were years of hurt to unpack. But we started with coffee. Then phone calls, then a visit. She met my brother's kids. She tasted my salted honey custard and cried because it reminded her of something her own grandmother used to make. And then there was Mia. She was 8 when I first met her, foster system. Quiet, eyes that had seen too much. She came to one of my community baking classes for kids. Didn't say much, but her little hands knew exactly how to fold butter into dough without being told twice. The adoption took 2 years. Now she's 12, and she calls me mom without hesitation. She has her own corner of the kitchen where she experiments with flavors, chocolate chili cookies that are surprisingly good. Lemon basil scones that make customers close their eyes the same way they used to for mine. There's a man now, too. James. He owns the bookstore next door. We met when he wandered in looking for coffee and stayed for the brown butter brownie. He's patient, kind, understands when I need to stay late to finish a batch. We take weekends off together, Mia included, and go hiking. Or to the farmer's market. Or just sit on the couch reading while something proofs in the kitchen. I'm 42 now. My life is smaller than it was. 1 location, 20 employees, lines on weekends, but not around the block. But it's mine. And it's full. Full of people who choose to be there. Full of flavors I still create at 3 a.m. when inspiration hits. Full of Mia's laughter when a dough rises perfectly. Full of James's hand in mine on Sunday mornings. I visit Maggie's grave sometimes. It's in a quiet cemetery with a view of the hills. I bring daisies, simple, sturdy flowers that don't need much to bloom. I talk to her. About Mia's school play. About the new cardamom orange babka that's selling out every morning. About how I finally understand what she meant all those years ago when she said some things are built to last. And some things are built to teach you when to let go. Walking away didn't destroy me. It saved me. And in the end, it saved what mattered most about what we'd built together, the heart of it. The part that was never about 28 locations or magazine covers. It was always about choosing people who choose you back. And now, every morning when I unlock the door to my little bakery, smell the first batch of dough proofing, hear Mia humming in the back, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not because someone claimed me, but because I finally claimed myself. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the bakery is closed and Mia is asleep upstairs, I sit on the little porch out back with a cup of tea and think about that key, the one I left on Maggie's desk all those years ago. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was gravity. When you build something on a foundation of trust, of loyalty, of showing up every single day for 12 years, and then someone decides that foundation is disposable. The collapse isn't sabotage. It's just what happens when the thing holding everything together is finally removed. I learned that revenge doesn't heal you. It proves a point, maybe. It protects what's sacred, sometimes. But it doesn't fill the empty spaces inside. What healed me was choosing, every day after I walked away, to build something smaller, but truer. A life where my hands are still in the dough, but my heart isn't on the chopping block. A life where family isn't the person who claims you when it's convenient, but the people who stay when it's hard. Mia's laughter in the kitchen. James's quiet presence beside me. My mother's tentative visits that have slowly turned into Sunday dinners. My brother stopping by just because he can. That's the real legacy. Not 28 locations. Not magazine covers or awards or lines around the block. It's the quiet knowledge that I'm no longer pouring everything I have into something that might one day decide I'm replaceable. I'm irreplaceable here. In this small space I created. In the hearts of the people who choose me back. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt like the invisible one holding everything together, only to be told you're standing in the way of progress, know this. You are the secret ingredient. And one day, when you decide you've given enough to people who won't see your worth, walking away isn't losing. It's the moment you finally start rising. Thank you for listening. If that moment with the key, the soft clink that changed everything, stuck with you, or if Maggie's apology, or Mia's first perfect scone, or any part of this journey made you feel less alone, tell me in the comments. What was the moment that hit you hardest? And if you know someone who needs to hear that they're allowed to walk away and still be whole, share this with them. You never know whose 48-hour countdown is quietly ticking. We'll see you in the next one. Take care of your heart. It's the only one you've got.